Hello friends and enemies, and welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be talking about another episode of More Oral. This time we're going to be talking about Season 3, Episode 5, Trigger. This episode takes focus on parental relationships. We get two examples of some less than healthy family relationships in this episode. One being the somewhat resentful and neglectful parents of Dowie, that being Kim and Carl Latchkey, and the less than stellar parents of Orel, being Blaberta and Clay Puppington. This episode starts out with Dowie getting hurt while playing catch with an automatic praise machine, which he uses to get some type of fatherly approval, which he can't from his real father because his real father couldn't care less about him. But he ends up scraping his knee, and surprisingly enough, this machine doesn't actually provide any medical support for this. So he ends up going to his mother for help. She seems a bit annoyed by his presence and by the fact that she actually has to try and help her son. His father then enters the room and ends up berating Dowie, implying that Dowie is trying to steal his mother away from his father, even though it's just his mom. I'd also like to note here that either Dowie is really tall for his age or Carl is really short, because Dowie at 12 years old stands above neck height of his dad. But anyways, Carl ends up kicking Dowie out of the room while saying he gave him some cash earlier so he can buy his own band-aids. This makes me wonder what kind of job Carl Latchkey has to be able to afford a house and is able to pay off his son to leave him alone. Like, I know this show takes place in the past when $1 was worth a lot more, but it still seems very suspicious. Like, who knows, maybe he has a side job that has something to do with him and his wife constantly giggling. Anyways, as we continue on, we see Dowie walking, getting more and more upset as he sees healthy father-son relationships around him, crescendoing in him throwing a rock at two squirrels. And the crazy part about all this misplaced rage that he used to lash out at the squirrels with is that he realizes that he isn't even actually sorry, even though he did initially say it. Then a gunshot is heard and Dowie comes across Clay trying to teach Orel how to shoot, to which he associates with Orel having a dad who cares. And to be honest, I'm pretty sure that Clay cares more about appearances rather than how his son is actually doing. We then see Orel fail to be able to shoot some empty bottles while Clay begins to berate and lecture Orel. Dowie takes the opportunity to shoot the targets perfectly, without hesitation, and Orel is amazed to see that and asks how he's able to do this. Dowie then says that he doesn't know and states that maybe try and pretend that no one cares and that nothing you do ever means anything to anybody in a very depressing way. It is at this point where Clay suggests that Dowie becomes Orel's shooting coach and even goes on to call him deputy. This is the most amount of approval from a father figure that Dowie has ever gotten before, so he ends up latching on to this concept of being the deputy and having this type of special relationship with Clay. We learn later that Clay is just doing this for the sake of making Orel jealous, which really just furthers my point that he doesn't really care about how his son is doing as long as that he can shoot and tell people that Orel killed something during their hunting trip. It is only when Blaberta tells Orel that she washed and dried his lucky Bible that he is actually able to shoot his gun. It is then established that whenever Orel has a moment of anger or strong emotional feelings while holding the gun, he ends up firing a shot randomly. Clay then tells Orel if he keeps misfiring and causing property damage that he will have to take Dowie on the hunting trip instead of him. This causes Dowie to get motivation to make Orel angry and to mess up his shooting more often. So he does do that and says things that anger Orel and make him shoot randomly throughout the day. As this continues, Orel goes down a downward spiral where he ends up pulling the trigger out of anger more and more often. One of the more notable moments is when Orel misfires his gun when he is taking his gun to show and tell and accidentally fires it off in the school, thus making Orel officially the first person to ever shoot a gun in school. And this is a very manipulative tactic that Dowie does here because he caused a yawning chain in class, making Orel feel very self-conscious and that nobody cared at all about what he was saying during his presentation. When Clay ends up getting billed for all the damages that Orel has caused by misfiring his gun, he is furious and calls Dowie into his study. Dowie then says that Orel has an itchy trigger finger and that Orel will not make enough progress before the hunting trip. Clay then decides to have Dowie over for dinner, giving him Orel's seats and even gives him the honor of saying grace, which really gets under Orel's skin because, as we know, Orel is really into Christianity and church, so for him being able to say grace is a very big honor which Dowie takes away from him in this moment. Dowie then says a prayer, asking for forgiveness for the actions of others, implying that he's talking about Orel, and this causes Orel to fire off another shot, which makes Clay even more angry. We then get another montage of Clay treating Doey as his own son while treating Orel as a second fiddle right in front of him. And each time he does this, Orel ends up firing off another round on accident in anger. When Orel sees Clay and Doey bonding over smoking cigarettes with one another, it ends up breaking Orel to a certain extent. It is at this point when Orel ends up feeling nothing, and while he shoots at the targets, this causes him to be able to shoot the targets perfectly accurate, mirroring how Doey felt at the beginning of this episode. Orel has this mindset now that what he does do does not matter to anybody and that he's invisible to everybody. And in response to this, Clay actually seems to praise him finally becoming a better shot. Doey then tries to say that he will help Orel more, but Clay then says that all the effort that Doey has been putting into trying to be taken on the hunting trip was just a plot to make Orel jealous, so that he would become a better shot. And it is at this point where the episode ends, and chronologically I assume this is like 2 days before actual hunting trip. This episode showed us a lot about the manipulative nature of Clay, and how he's perfectly fine with making his son suffer emotional trauma if it makes him better in his eyes and the eyes of the public. It showed us that despite all the things wrong with Clay, that Orel still seeks his approval. We also get insight into Doey's character in this episode. We see that he is desperate for some type of parental approval, or even for someone just to acknowledge that he exists. Yes, he ends up making Orel feel like he doesn't matter at all in this episode, which is wrong, but it is then implied that Doey feels like he's invisible and that nothing he does will ever matter constantly throughout the series. This is the one moment in the series that we see Doey actually some type of healthy relationship with a father figure, and it's Clay, so that just tells you how bad it is for him. We see two types of parental abuse here in this episode. One with Doey, that being neglect, where his parents want him out of the house and rather not see him to the point where they literally just give him money to go off and do something else. The second is with Orel, that being active emotional manipulation and gaslighting, where Clay just wants him to shoot better so he convinces Orel that he's going to take his best friend on the hunting trip instead of him because he is the better shot. And I think the name of this episode, Trigger, is in reference to how when Orel sees Clay basically replacing him with his best friend, it causes enough of an emotional response for him to pull the trigger on his gun, also known as triggering him. Overall, I think this was a good episode, especially since it gives us insight into the family dynamic of Orel and Clay, and we also got to learn more about Doey and how he basically has no parents. It's a wonder how he's able to be a well-behaved child most of the time, unlike Joe, who also has a lot of family issues regarding his parents, but unlike Joe, who acts out a lot and also has a lot of issues regarding his parents. Anyways, that's the end of this episode. I would love to hear your thoughts about it in the comments down below. Personally, I don't have any experience about going on any father-son hunting trips, so I would love to hear what you guys have to say about it. I hope you guys leave a like on the video, and I hope you guys enjoyed it. I also like to say thank you for all the major support that we've gotten recently on the channel. It means a lot. It means a lot. It's crazy to think that this channel is only a few months old, and hopefully if you guys are new here, I would be very grateful if you subscribe. I've also started a Patreon that I'm going to be linking down in the comments below. It's basically there if anybody feels like supporting me. I'm trying to get to the goal where I can pay for my editing software without losing money on it each month. You're not obligated to it. Watching and subscribing and leaving a like, even just commenting that's more than enough. But if anyone feels generous enough to help support me creating videos, feel free to do so. Once again, regardless, I'm just very grateful to have you all here viewing and enjoying the content with me. And until next time, I'll see you guys.